Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. Andy relished these quiet moments after hours. It wasn't just the peace that allowed him to focus on his work. It was the solitude that gave him the courage to be himself. With a furtive glance around the empty office, he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small tube of lipstick. His hand trembled slightly as he uncapped it, revealing a deep, rich shade of burgundy. Andy closed his eyes, took a steadying breath, and carefully applied the color to his lips. The familiar motion calmed him, and a small smile played at the corners of his freshly painted mouth. Opening his eyes, Andy admired his reflection in the dark computer screen. The color suited him, bringing out the warmth in his hazel eyes and complementing his olive skin tone. For a moment, he allowed himself to bask in the feeling of rightness that washed over him. The sudden click of heels on tile shattered the silence, jolting Andy from his reverie. Panic seized him as he realized he'd been caught off guard. He scrambled to wipe the lipstick off, but it was too late. Sandra, his manager, rounded the corner into his cubicle. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene before her. Andy, caught like a deer in headlights, lipstick smeared across his mouth and hand. "Andy?" Sandra's voice was laced with surprise. "What are you still doing here?" Andy's mind raced, searching for an explanation, an excuse, anything to salvage the situation, but words failed him, leaving him stammering and red-faced. Sandra's expression softened as she watched her usually composed accountant struggle. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Hey, it's okay. Take a deep breath." Grateful for the lifeline, Andy inhaled shakily. He avoided Sandra's gaze, fixating on a spot on the carpet. "Sorry," he mumbled. "I didn't think anyone would be here." Sandra leaned against his desk, her posture relaxed. "You don't need to apologize, Andy. There's nothing wrong with expressing yourself." Her words, so unexpected, finally made Andy look up. Instead of the disgust or ridicule he'd feared, he saw only kindness in Sandra's eyes. Andy hesitated, unsure how to proceed. He'd kept this part of himself hidden for so long, the idea of discussing it openly felt alien. Sandra seemed to sense his discomfort. She reached into her purse and pulled out a pack of makeup removal wipes. "Here," she said, offering them to Andy. "These might help, and if you'd like, we could grab a coffee and talk. No pressure, though." Andy accepted the wipes gratefully, cleaning his face with trembling hands. As the lipstick disappeared, he felt a pang of loss, but Sandra's offer hung in the air, a beacon of potential understanding. "Coffee sounds good," he said quietly. Sandra smiled warmly. "Great. There's a little cafe around the corner that stays open late. Shall we?" Andy nodded, gathering his things. As they walked to the elevator together, he felt a mix of anxiety and hope churning in his stomach. He'd never imagined his secret would be discovered like this, let alone that it might lead to a friendly conversation over coffee. The night air was cool against Andy's face as they stepped out of the office building. Street lamps cast a soft glow over the sidewalk, and the distant hum of traffic provided a soothing white noise. Sandra led the way, her confident stride a stark contrast to Andy's hesitant steps. "It's just up here," Sandra said, gesturing to a cozy-looking storefront with warm yellow light spilling from its windows. A hand-painted sign above the door read, "Midnight Brew." As they entered, the rich aroma of coffee enveloped them. The cafe was nearly empty, with just a couple of students hunched over laptops in the corner. Sandra approached the counter, where a barista with vibrant blue hair greeted them with a tired smile. "2 large lattes, please," Sandra ordered, then turned to Andy. "Unless you'd prefer something else." Andy shook his head. "Latte's fine, thanks." While they waited for their drinks, Sandra guided them to a secluded booth near the back of the cafe. Andy slid into the seat, his fingers nervously playing with the sleeve of his white dress shirt. Sandra settled across from him, her demeanor relaxed and open. "So, Andy," she began gently, "how long have you been interested in makeup?" Andy's eyes darted around, checking to make sure no one was within earshot. It's been a while, he admitted softly. Since college, I guess. But I've never really talked about it with anyone. Their conversation paused as the barista brought over their lattes. Sandra thanked her, then turned her attention back to Andy. That must have been difficult, keeping it to yourself for so long. Andy nodded, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. It is. I have always been afraid of how people would react, especially at work. Sandra took a sip of her latte, considering her words carefully. I understand that fear. But Andy, you're a valuable member of our team. Your skills and your work ethic are what matter most. This doesn't change that. Relief washed over Andy, and he felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I was so worried you'd want to fire me or something. Sandra chuckled softly. Fire one of my best accountants over some lipstick? Not a chance. Though I have to say, that shade looked great on you. A small smile tugged at Andy's lips. Really? I've always liked deeper colors, but I wasn't sure if they suited me. Absolutely, Sandra affirmed. You have a good eye for color. Have you ever thought about exploring makeup more openly? Andy's smile faded slightly. I've wanted to, but I wouldn't even know where to start. And what would people say? Sandra leaned forward, her eyes bright with an idea. What if I helped you? We could start small, maybe with some subtle looks for the office. And if anyone has a problem with it, they'll have to deal with me. Andy blinked, surprised by the offer. You'd do that? But why? Because everyone deserves to feel comfortable in their own skin, Sandra replied simply. And if makeup helps you feel more like yourself, then I want to support that. Tears pricked at the corners of Andy's eyes. He'd never expected to find such acceptance, let alone from his manager. I don't know what to say. Thank you, Sandra. Really. Sandra reached across the table, giving Andy's hand a reassuring squeeze. You're welcome. Now, finish your latte and we'll start planning your fabulous new look. As they continued to talk, the weight of secrecy that had burdened Andy for so long began to lift. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope that he might be able to truly be himself, both in and out of the office. The next morning, Andy stood in front of his bathroom mirror, heart racing. He and Sandra had agreed to start small, just a hint of tinted moisturizer and a swipe of clear mascara. But even this felt monumental. With slightly shaking hands, Andy applied the products, marveling at the subtle difference they made. His skin looked smoother, more radiant, and his eyes seemed to sparkle. It wasn't dramatic, but it was enough to make him feel more confident. As he dressed in his usual work attire, a blue button-down and charcoal slacks, Andy felt a strange mix of excitement and trepidation. He wondered if anyone would notice, if there would be whispers or stares. The commute to work was a blur of anxiety, but as Andy stepped into the office, he was met with nothing out of the ordinary. People greeted him as usual, focused on their morning coffees and email inboxes. It wasn't until he reached his desk that he saw a small gift bag waiting for him. Inside was a sleek, professional-looking makeup palette and a note in Sandra's handwriting. For when you're ready to take the next step, you've got this. Andy smiled, tucking the gift into his drawer. He booted up his computer and dove into his work, feeling more at ease than he had in years. As the weeks passed, Andy gradually expanded his makeup routine. A touch of subtle eyeshadow here, a hint of blush there. He started experimenting with different lip colors, though he kept them muted for the office. To his surprise and relief, the reactions from his co-workers were largely positive. There were a few raised eyebrows at first, but Sandra had apparently had a word with the team about inclusivity and self-expression. Most people seemed to take it in stride, and a few even complimented his skills. One Friday afternoon, as Andy was packing up to leave, his cubicle neighbor Mark stopped by. Hey, Andy, a bunch of us are going out for drinks. Want to join? Andy hesitated. He'd always declined these invitations in the past, too afraid of letting his guard down, but now, bolstered by his newfound confidence, he found himself nodding. Sure, that sounds great. The bar was crowded and noisy, but Andy felt surprisingly at ease. He nursed a beer, listening to his co-workers chat about their weekend plans and office gossip. For once, he didn't feel like an outsider looking in. As the night wore on, Andy excused himself to use the restroom. As he was washing his hands, he caught sight of his reflection in the mirror. His makeup had held up well, the subtle shimmer on his eyelids catching the light. A man at the sink next to him noticed Andy's gaze. "Your eye makeup looks great," he said with a friendly smile. "What brand do you use?" Andy blinked, momentarily stunned by the casual compliment. "Oh, thanks," he managed. "It's a mix, actually. I'm still experimenting." The man nodded appreciatively. "Well, you've got skills. I can never get my liner that even." They chatted for a few minutes about makeup techniques before heading back to their respective groups. As Andy rejoined his co-workers, he felt a warm glow of acceptance. It was a small interaction, but it meant the world to him. The following Monday, Andy arrived at work with a new spring in his step. He'd spent the weekend practicing more adventurous looks, and today he'd decided to wear a subtle winged eyeliner to the office. As he settled at his desk, Sandra stopped by. "Looking sharp, Andy," she said with a wink. "How are you feeling about everything?" Andy smiled genuinely. "Better than I have in years, honestly. Thank you again for all your support." Sandra beamed. "I'm so glad to hear that. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something. How would you feel about leading a workshop on inclusive workplace practices? Your journey could really inspire others." Andy's eyes widened. "Me? Lead a workshop?" Sandra nodded encouragingly. "You've shown incredible courage, Andy. Your story could help create a more open and accepting environment for everyone. Think about it, okay?" As Sandra walked away, Andy sat back in his chair, mind reeling. Him speaking in front of people, sharing his experiences, it was terrifying, and yet oddly exciting. He thought about how much his life had changed in just a few short weeks. From hiding in shadows to considering leading a workshop. It was almost unbelievable. With a deep breath, Andy opened his email and began to type a response to Sandra. "I'd be honored to lead the workshop," he wrote, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. As he hit send, Andy realized that this wasn't just about makeup anymore. It was about being true to himself, about helping others feel accepted, about creating change. And for the first time in his life, he felt ready to embrace that challenge. The day of the workshop arrived faster than Andy had anticipated. He stood in front of the mirror in the office bathroom, giving himself one last pep talk. His makeup was flawless, a professional yet expressive look that he'd spent hours perfecting. A soft brown, smoky eye brought out the gold flecks in his hazel eyes, while a muted mauve lipstick added a touch of color without being overwhelming. Andy smoothed down his navy blue blazer, took a deep breath, and headed to the conference room. As he entered, he was surprised to see it already half full. Colleagues from various departments were seated around the large table, some looking curious, others slightly uncomfortable. Sandra caught his eye from the back of the room and gave him an encouraging nod. Andy cleared his throat and made his way to the front, willing his hands not to shake as he arranged his notes. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice only slightly wavering. "Thank you for coming today. We're here to discuss inclusive workplace practices with a focus on self-expression and acceptance." As Andy delved into his presentation, he found his nervousness fading. He shared his personal journey, the fear and isolation he'd felt, and the transformative power of acceptance. He talked about the importance of creating an environment where everyone felt free to be themselves, and how that could lead to increased productivity and job satisfaction. To his surprise, people were engaged. They asked questions, shared their own experiences, and offered suggestions for making the office more inclusive. What had started as a terrifying ordeal turned into a lively, productive discussion. By the time the workshop ended, Andy felt exhilarated. Colleagues he'd barely spoken to before came up to thank him for his honesty and courage. Even those who had seemed uncomfortable at the start approached him with thoughtful questions. As the room cleared out, Sandra made her way to the front. "Andy, that was incredible," she said, beaming with pride. "You've started something important here today?" Andy felt a warmth spreading through his chest. "Thank you, Sandra, for everything. I couldn't have done this without your support." Sandra squeezed his shoulder affectionately. "You did all the hard work. I just gave you a little push." As they left the conference room together, Andy noticed a few of his coworkers gathered by the water cooler, deep in conversation. They waved him over enthusiastically. "Andy, we were just talking about your workshop," said Emily from HR. "We think it would be great to make this a regular thing. Maybe even start a diversity and inclusion committee. Would you be interested in being part of that?" Andy felt a surge of excitement. "Absolutely," he said without hesitation. "I'd love to help however I can." As the group chatted animatedly about ideas for the committee, Andy caught a glimpse of his reflection in a nearby window. His makeup was still perfect, but it was his smile that truly shone. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. Over the next few months, Andy threw himself into his new role on the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. He worked tirelessly to organize events, create educational materials, and foster open dialogues throughout the company. His accounting work remained impeccable, but now it shared space with his passion for creating a more inclusive workplace. One day, as Andy was putting the finishing touches on a presentation for the committee, he received an unexpected email. It was from the CEO requesting a meeting to discuss the impact of the new initiatives. Nervousness fluttered in Andy's stomach as he rode the elevator to the executive floor. He'd chosen his outfit carefully that morning, a well-tailored gray suit paired with a soft lavender shirt that complemented his makeup. As he'd become more comfortable expressing himself, he'd discovered a love for color coordination that extended beyond just his face. The CEO's assistant ushered Andy into a spacious office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The CEO, a distinguished woman in her 50s, rose from behind her desk to greet him. "Andy, thank you for coming," she said, gesturing for him to take a seat. "I've been hearing wonderful things about the work you've been doing with the Diversity and Inclusion Committee." Andy sat down, trying to keep his nervousness from showing. "Thank you, ma'am. It's been a team effort, really." The CEO smiled warmly. "From what I understand, you've been a driving force behind many of the initiatives. The feedback we've been getting from employees has been overwhelmingly positive. People feel more valued, more comfortable being themselves at work." She paused, leaning forward slightly. "In fact, we've seen a marked improvement in employee satisfaction and productivity across the board. I wanted to personally thank you for your contributions." Andy felt a swell of pride. "I'm just happy I could make a difference," he said sincerely. The CEO nodded thoughtfully. "You've done more than that, Andy. You've helped change our company culture for the better, which is why I'd like to offer you a promotion." Andy's eyes widened in surprise. "A promotion?" "Yes," the CEO confirmed. "We're creating a new position, Director of Diversity and Inclusion. Given your passion and the results you've achieved, I believe you'd be perfect for the role. Of course, you'd need to step back from your accounting duties, but I think your skills would be better utilized in this new capacity. What do you think?" For a moment, Andy was speechless. He thought about how far he'd come, from hiding who he was to potentially leading diversity efforts for the entire company. It was more than he'd ever dreamed possible. I'd be honored," he finally managed, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for this opportunity." The CEO stood, extending her hand. "No, Andy, thank you for having the courage to be yourself and for inspiring others to do the same. You've made our company a better place." As Andy shook her hand, he felt a sense of completeness wash over him. He'd found not just acceptance, but appreciation for his true self. And now he had the chance to help others do the same. Leaving the CEO's office, Andy's mind was reeling with possibilities. He thought about all the people he could help, all the positive changes he could implement. But more than that, he thought about the shy, scared person he'd been just a few months ago and how far he'd come. He paused by a reflective surface in the hallway, taking in his appearance. The person staring back at him was confident, successful, and most importantly, authentic. Andy smiled, touching up his lipstick before heading back to his soon-to-be old desk. As he packed up his belongings, preparing to move to his new office, Andy found the small tube of burgundy lipstick that had started it all. He held it for a moment, marveling at how something so small had led to such monumental changes in his life. Carefully, he placed the lipstick in his bag. It would have a place of honor on his new desk, a reminder of the journey he'd taken and the courage it had required. As Andy looked around the accounting department one last time, he caught Sandra's eye across the room. She gave him a knowing smile and a thumbs up. Andy grinned back, feeling a rush of gratitude for her unwavering support. With a deep breath, Andy picked up his box of belongings and headed towards his new office and his new life. He was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, secure in the knowledge that he was finally, truly himself. As he stepped into the elevator, a young intern held the door, looking at him with a mix of admiration and uncertainty. "Excuse me, sir," she said hesitantly. "I just wanted to say, your makeup always looks amazing. I've been too nervous to try anything bold at work, but seeing you has made me feel like maybe I could." Andy felt a warmth spread through his chest. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "And you absolutely can. Remember, your self-expression is valid and valuable. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.